I was in Arnhem in Belgium with my fellow soldiers on a battlefield tour. One night we went out in Arnhem and I was the designated minibus driver. It was my job as the driver to make sure that everyone got home that night. So when the group decided it would be a good idea to go around the red light district, I had no choice but to go with them. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have made my excuses and left, but I couldn't as I was their driver, so for my safety and theirs, I had to stick with them. Now, don't worry, I didn't do anything, but when I got back home, I thought about whether being in the army was a good job for a Christian to be doing. I knew a devout Christian who'd been a brigadier in the army, so I rang him up and I had a chat with him. He gave me a few things to think about, which I shall tell you about in due course. But before that though, let's think about the different types of vocation there have been. If you think about the Old Testament, there were some people who we think of as being called by God to do things. Abraham was called to move country and start a nation. Joseph had a vision of his future importance. The prophet Samuel was called by God to deliver a message to the prophet Eli. Isaiah claimed that he was called by God. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." He said, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." However, if you look at the book of Kings, Isaiah's message didn't fall on deaf ears, and he was well respected, and his opinion was sought after by kings and other prophets. Also, Joseph's vision of the sun, moon and stars bowing down to him, which he interpreted as his parents bowing down to him, is ambiguous. We have no record of his father ever actually bowing down to him. My point is this, that things may not be quite as clear as they might first appear. Just because someone hears a voice or receives a sound or a vision doesn't mean that they have it all mapped out for them. There are a lot of vocations or callings in the Old Testament. There were priests, such as the Levitical priesthood, but possibly others. There were prophets and prophetesses. There were Levites or temple servants. There were Nazarites, those who took religious vows. There were kings. There were civil servants, such as Naaman the leper and Joseph. There was military service, but not just male. There was Judith and two others in the book of Judges who killed foreign leaders. There were skilled craftsmen. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts." So there were many vocations. Now these categories weren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Hilda, the prophetess, looked after the wardrobe of the temple. The prophet Ezekiel got his calling as a prophet not long after he had started as a priest. Samuel had already been serving in the temple for some time before he got his calling to be a prophet. When we get to the New Testament, there seems to be a shift to more voluntary service and towards training. The disciples were trained over 3 years, whereas previously things would have generally followed the 7-year apprentice model, or that you were born into a family and you took on your father's business. Incidentally, this causes a lot of misunderstanding for orthodoxy in the West, where we are used to a 3-year training model for the priesthood, rather than the more apprentice-based model or from childhood model in the East. Someone should go through the ranks, of reader, subdeacon, deacon, then priest. And the church canons show that you should not become a deacon before the age of 25, nor a priest before 30, and you shouldn't hear confessions until you are 40. So that's some of the background of vocations. The New Testament lists many more. But this indicates that there are many ways to serve God, and the personal process to work things out is not always straightforward. So for me personally, when I was 14, I had a conversation with myself. I said to myself, if Christianity is true, then I'm willing to commit everything to it and become a missionary. Now here I am, 27 years later. I volunteered as a missionary for 3 years. I've been a soldier for 6 years, a student for 12 years, a nurse for 10 years, and clergy for 6 years. I'm not trying to show off, I'm actually trying to show that since I committed my life to Christ at the age of 16, how best to serve God with my life is a question that I'm still asking myself. And don't presume that because any of us here is wearing black, that we have found all the answers. We have probably narrowed down some of the options, but anyone worthy of wearing black or blue as a nurse or khaki in the army will still be asking themselves that question and will still be open to change. If you think about Abraham and Sarah, Elizabeth and Zachariah, in their old age, God says to them, right, I'm going to give you a baby. I love that. Zachariah is serving Vespers as the high priest in the temple, and God says to him, your high priestly service to me is to have a baby. Now their reluctance to change and believe God caused them a lot of problems. However, for most of us, the normal process is trying to narrow down the options available to us and to find something that we are suited to and that we all find fulfilling. And so we can have stages. So the initial stage. So we maybe have some ideas and we try and ask God and we try and ask other people about what they think of our ideas. So who can you ask? You've got your family, you've got your Christian friends, you've got your priest or your spiritual father. But bear with me on this. Their opinion matters, but it will never be purely objective. It will always be partly subjective. And if this is counterintuitive, but one of the best sources for advice are your non-Christian friends or your school teachers or university tutors. They're actually likely to be skilled in appraising people's skills and abilities, and their advice is likely to be impartial. They don't care if you become a priest or a nun or many other vocations, as it's not going to affect them. So please don't overlook them as a source of unbiased opinion. As you'll know, many families will have an idea of this child must become a doctor, or this child must become a priest. Actually in England that's how it used to work. The eldest son would have to be a priest and the second son would have to go to the army and things like that. So your family can have a lot of ideas that they try and force you into. And many of your Christian friends will have sort of, well, if he becomes a priest, he might have to tell me what to do. Well, I don't want that. So that's what I'm trying to get at. You may not get the best opinion from those people. So that's asking other people, but what about asking God? The application stage. So sometimes God will answer you for the process of applying for a job. There have been a couple of times in my life when during an interview I've given an answer that has been taken entirely the wrong way. So don't get me wrong, for one of them, my entire foreseeable future depended on it. Now for me, it was a Job-like experience. Much of my worldview was shattered and I did mature because of it. My hopes and my foreseeable future had all been planned about doing that job. And it didn't happen and I had to rethink everything for a considerable time. But I can honestly look back on those roles now where I gave those answers to the questions and didn't get the jobs. And they were not positions of servitude, they were positions of slavery. In order to do my job, whatever it is, I'm going to need certain things. I'm going to need management support and a basic quality of life and living conditions that are reasonable. I'm happy to make sacrifices, but think about a monk. They actually get a basic standard of living. They get a room, i.e. some personal space, they get meals, and they get someone in charge who's looking out for their well-being. Now, I think it's right to expect those basics, that you need to get enough to live on, a reasonable standard of living, and some reasonable support to do your role. Then, another stage where God can answer us is the training stage. So some vocations will then have a training stage, such as nursing or teaching, and during that process, you may work out if it's not for you, or they may tell you it's not for you. And then it is still a stage that God can answer you on the job. So your affirmation about what you're doing may come when you're doing the job, or you may have times of doubt. So to go back to my post-Arnhem review, I phoned my friend the brigadier and asked him if the Christian life and the army were compatible. And he said this: Christ encountered 4 centurions, none of whom did he condemn, and the Apostle Paul appreciated the sense of discipline from the army and talked about the armour of God. So at root, there is no basic issue. So I felt a lot better about that and carried on in the army for another 3 years. So rather than in the early stages, that's where expertise can be really helpful. When you're doing the job and you need some reassurance or help to reevaluate things. Now in some jobs, the process of expertise may start a bit earlier. For instance, clinical supervision may start during training. So as a trainee nurse, I had to have clinical supervision from someone who was more experienced in nursing. And if you train to be a psychologist, you have to have a senior psychologist train you and talk to you through your cases. But again, please bear in mind, just be careful about those you know well. Because not just what I was talking about in families, but I've seen it in churches where people make predictions about what people should become, and it can be very unhelpful. I worked with a lady in Israel who, before she went there, someone had prophesied to her that she would be the right-hand woman, or the right-hand man, as it were, of the people out there. And she totally overstressed and overworked herself as a result, and it was really destructive to her, and the whole place, actually. So that process of stages can be a helpful way of trying to work things out. They are some of the more external processes that can be involved in working out how to serve God. But what about some of the more internal processes? So, let's look at your Harry's window. So, please take one and pass one on back. You may need one between two. See how it goes. You run out, so. Just about enough. Good. Okay. So sorry, I don't want to patronise you, but I'll just explain what that is you've got in front of you. In psychology, there are certain tools you can use as a way to sort of give a framework to an understanding. And this is based on one of those tools where you can think about yourself and how you see yourself and how others see you. So, for me, wanting to become a priest, this template, this way of understanding things, was more helpful to the process, because there's no job application form, there's no interview to become a priest, there's no seminary in this country to go to and get training. I'm not being funny, but the Cambridge Institute and the Theological Seminary in Birmingham are not seminaries.
Quite right.
You can go and study theology, but you'll get no pastoral training or liturgical training. So for me, as someone who wanted to become a priest, who couldn't just apply for the job or go and do work experience, this was much more the process. It was a revelation of my true self that God could see, but others couldn't necessarily see that. Now, I decided I want to be a priest when I was doing something else. I was doing missionary work in Israel, and I got talking to a Jewish lady who'd recently become a Christian. I explained to her the difficulties she would now face having made that decision, some of the ways to help her grow in the spiritual life, and I came to realise that I was better at helping people who had made the decision to follow Christ to grow in the spiritual life than I was at helping them to make that decision in the first place. So I thought that I can help people to grow in the spiritual life better as a priest than as a missionary. Now, there were some conflicts. Other people had me labelled as wanting to become a full-time missionary, and they didn't want to change their view of me. As people, we are often very reluctant to let other people change. So I went to a Bible college for an interview and got turned down. I met with my priest afterwards, and this was while I was still an Anglican, and he agreed with me that the reasons which they gave for turning me down weren't real reasons. And I came away with a deeper realisation that there were conflicts between that life and orthodoxy, which was having an increasingly gravitational effect on me. So my difficulties continued within my church when a friend and I asked to start a young adult club, and they turned us down. So the way that others saw me and what I could do was in conflict with how I saw myself. Now, these things and others were some of the goads prodding and pushing me towards orthodoxy. So when I became orthodox, I had to go through the process of your Harry's window to convince others. Because while you personally may know the link between box 1 and 4, so on your grids, you may know how you want to, how you present yourself, and you may know the link between that and how God sees you. But you have to demonstrate that link to other people. So, the monastic route, and there's two sort of ways through this, which I'll illustrate. So the monastic route is mainly anti-clockwise. So, on your things, you've got a pen that you can put the arrows on. So the monastic route will go from what we want others to see to what we don't want others to see through confession, and that's how you gain to your spirit, your true self. That's a simplification, I know, but the other way that happens through church really is that you go from what you want others to see to what they actually see to get to your true self. So, for instance, many of my people in my church don't come for confession. So I don't try and force them, but rather I exhort them to live good Christian lives, so that actually what others see of them improves and they get better, and people have to reassess their opinion of them, and they grow in the faith and they grow in their goodness to other people, and that's how they develop their true self, the self made in the image of God. So the monastic path is mainly secret and hidden. Think of St. Silouan the Athonite. Many in his monastery didn't think of him as a saint. He was much more secret and hidden so that others didn't see it. Whereas in the church we have to show people various things about ourselves. That we can organise things, that we can be dependable, that we can lead good Christians' lives and be of good report, not just in our church community, but also in the wider community. If you remember, St. Paul says you must be of good report if you want to be a priest, and it's not just within your church, it is within the wider community. So that's the more common route for personal spiritual development. But you also have to make orthodoxy happen. And I had to jump through some hoops. So I organised conferences, church fundraising days, and I sucked a lot of eggs doing another undergraduate Orthodox theological course. I didn't curry favour with people, I just showed that orthodoxy meant the world to me, and I wanted to give it to other people and get others involved with it. So to become a priest, you do have to go through these motions. Actually, both routes. Your spiritual father, who hears your confessions, is normally your sponsor to the bishop when asking for an ordination. But also, you do have to make a bit of song and dance about yourself to become a priest. I put in a lot of hard work. I remember once, though, my spiritual father, Father Sigmund Maxfield, telling me that I was making things look too easy. I'd organised a Christmas fair with another lady from my church called Sylvia. And because we knew the people in our church, who could be depended on to do what and who was unreliable, and all those kind of things, because we orchestrated it so well and did so much planning, everyone thought it was easy and that we hadn't done a lot of work. So sometimes you can't win. No, I'm not that brilliant. I got passed over to become a priest at least 4 times before I made it happen. And I really did make it happen. Our church was praying for another church because the priest had had an aneurysm, like a stroke, and was struggling to run the church. I was only a subdeacon at the time, but I said, can't Beck, so that's my wife, and I do something to help. We went up to the church and had a look at the church, and we insisted that we could help. And we worked out the plan with others as to how to make it happen. That we'd have to move, how I could get further liturgical training, and make a smooth transition between myself and the other priest, and then put that plan into action, and now here I am. So that's another way to think about the process of pursuing the vocation, by making the internal external, and showing others not just that you want to do a vocation, but that you can do it. And don't exaggerate the difference between the two routes. I suggested. During the novice years, a monk, or somebody who wants to become a monk or nun, will have to do a lot of showing others how they can do it. They will have to really prove themselves to the other monks and nuns in the monastery that they're capable of it. Anyway, there I was at a party. By this time I was in my late 20s living in Shropshire, but I'd gone back to Kent, to the village where I grew up, and a lot of my friends from when I was a teenager were there. They'd all gone on to achieve good jobs. One of them was a headmistress, another was a newsreader for Sky Television, and I'm there. I'm James, I'm a care assistant. I'm at the bottom of the food chain. I wipe people's bottoms for a living. Anyway, so I had a real time of thinking, well, actually, God, I've given up everything. I've moved county, I've moved within the country, I've lost all my not lost all my friends, but I've moved away from all my friends. And here I am, come back, and I'm sort of still at the bottom. Well, since then, I've gone on and I've done other things. I've never really had the career out of nursing that I was hoping for. And if I had my time again, I wouldn't have become a nurse. I'd have been an occupational therapist or something with more regular hours. But I have achieved. I'm now in charge of a church with some of the best converted buildings for Orthodox use. I manage a clergy team, and my church has a healthy growth and replenishment rate. If I'd have stayed as an Anglican and become a priest, my job would not be as good as it is now. If I could turn the clock back, though, I would also have sorted out my hobbies better. The vocations, by which I mean forms of public service, be it whatever, be it police, be it the fire brigade, be it nursing, be it the army, be it the priesthood. And especially those that involve shift work, they can be very lonely. You get days off during the week when there's no one around, and they can be very soul destroying. The problem I didn't foresee was that because orthodoxy was my hobby for so long, involving a lot of my free time, when I turned my hobby into my job, I then didn't have any hobbies. It was one of the reasons why I became a soldier in the Territorial Army and stuck with it, to have some drinking buddies, and I hope to get some managerial training out of it. But when I got married, I just couldn't juggle all the commitments involved, and only having one weekend off a month to spend time with my wife wasn't enough. However, all this experience has been invaluable, and while I was passed over for the priesthood a few times, there actually wasn't a better priesthood for me than what I have now. And while I may not have been anyone else's first choice for it, and I may not be the best priest in the world, there is no one who could do my role better than I do it, of supporting another priest with memory problems based on my skills and experience in dementia care as a nurse. So my point is this: you may well find you get into a job where you feel you're just treading water. It's not giving you the opportunities that you feel it should be, and not getting you where you want to be. Now, I'm not being silly. I'm not saying hang on in there for the sake of it. But try and bear in mind the bigger picture. Think of Joseph from the Old Testament. He made the best out of the situations that he could. So when he had been stuck in a pit by his brothers and then got taken off into slavery, he developed himself to be the best servant in that household. Then he developed himself to be the best prisoner within the prison. And it actually meant that by the time he became the prime minister of that country, he had the skills and disposition needed to accomplish his vision. Because sorry, my notes don't make sense there. So he had the skills to accomplish his vision, because what he had seen and what others had seen were not what God had seen. So what God had seen of him, he still had to go through the motions of showing others that he could do things. Now, no job is perfect, but nevertheless work at being good at it, while trying to resist the temptation to become a workaholic. It is a persistent evil in our age that every employer will quite happily let you become a workaholic, and carry on at it until something better comes along, or you can find something better. And try and bear in mind that God has a much better reward scheme than money. Okay.